This is our subscriber interview with Joseph P. Farrell. His new book is The Cosmic War, Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Physics and Ancient Texts. And we are continuing our fascinating discussion. And I want to begin this segment to talk about Apsu and Tiamat. And I want to read a passage from the Enuma Elish. This is the Babylonian or Mesopotamian creation epic. When on high heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name, and the primeval Apsu who begat them, and Chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field was formed, no marsh was to be seen, when of the gods none had been called into being. The epic names, three primeval gods: Apsu, the fresh water; Tiamat, the salt water; and their son Mummy, I think that it's called, apparently the mist. And this interpretation of it, of course, I actually got this passage from Wikipedia. But when I read about this, and especially about the mingling of the water, I interpret that a little bit like this actually is about the collision or destruction of planets, and the fact that we now here on Earth both have salt water and fresh water, and that in itself actually is an interesting study. What's your interpretation of that passage I read there?
I interpret it at great length. In fact, I'm glad you brought up the Enuma Elish, because I cite from that particular text extensively in the Giza Death Star Destroyed, and I reproduce that citation in the Cosmic War, because in my reading of it, I interpret most of those texts as a metaphor or an attempt to preserve a physics of an undifferentiated medium. And the reason I do so is really because a physicist in this country by the name of Paul Laviolette, who's written extensively about these types of things in his works, the undifferentiated medium, water often becomes, if we read these texts, particularly from Sumeria and Egypt very carefully, becomes a metaphor for what they understand as basically a kind of an ether or a fabric of space-time, if you will. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I do in the Giza Death Star Destroyed and again in the Cosmic War is I cite the subsequent passages where Marduk and Tiamat are actually at war. And it's very interesting because I think that if we view the Enuma Elish in that way, most of the text is, in fact, about that war. It's not about the initial process of differentiation in creation. It's kind of a backdrop. That particular passage that you read is kind of a backdrop for this very lengthy description of the war and the weapons that were used on each side and what subsequently happened in the destruction of Tiamat. Mm-hmm. So for me, I interpret the entire text as less a creation epic and more as a war epic, which really kind of puts me at odds with most of academia, because they, of course, understand it to be entirely a creation epic, and that the war is simply a metaphor for that process. Yeah. But I take it very literally, because if we look at the passages that follow this, particularly in the fourth tablet of the Enuma Elish, there are in fact 7 tablets to the story, and that's why many people think that it's a creation epic, because of course it parallels the 7 days of creation in the book of Genesis. Yeah. But if we look at the war passages themselves, what is very interesting, if you examine the passages of Marduk and his assault on Tiamat, what is described there, I think, is the mechanism, the perfect mechanism, that a kind of a weaponry that would be based on the ability to configure stresses in the medium itself would do to a planet of that size. Mm-hmm. Because Tiamat is described as having quaked to her very being. Marduk is described as bringing in the winds from the four corners of the compass and so on and so forth, and then at the last moment driving his arrow into her. So it's almost kind of as if we can think of the simple analogy of filling a balloon to maximum pressure and then suddenly bursting it, with a pin or something like that. It's uncannily similar to the processes of a kind of a scalar physics or a torsion-based physics that would be able to configure these things, stresses in the medium, as a weapon. And that really is the mechanism, I think, that was used or employed in this technology that I've been talking about in the previous hour.
Oh, okay. You mentioned scalar weapons,
right.
Superheating the ionosphere, creating earthquakes. My mind is drawn back to, HARP technology, basically.
Yes. This is, to my mind, in examining the Giza Death Star hypothesis, and then again the Tablets of Destinies. And again, I have a whole chapter in the Cosmic War where I go through the text very carefully and speculate on the basis of certain technologies and theories in modern physics. And what I come down to is that it would appear that the Tablets of Destinies were, how to put it, they were the grating or interference pattern for a phase conjugate mirror of tremendous sophistication. Now, for your listeners who don't know what a phase conjugate mirror is, if we take a laser beam and shoot it at a target through the atmosphere of the Earth, of course, the atmosphere functions as a medium, but it also distorts any reflection of that beam back to its point of origin. So scientists have learned that if they interfere two laser beams on a target and then in a optical cavity back at the source of their emission, combine that interference pattern, if they then shoot a laser beam through that interference pattern itself, it arrives at the target undistorted. That's a phase conjugate mirror.
This is similar to how holographics are.
Yes, exactly so. Exactly. The Tablets of Destinies, I believe, were a catalog of the interference pattern of various celestial bodies in the universe that were important to this civilization. And that, of course, means that they would have enabled communication with those celestial bodies as well as a weaponry able to target them. And I go a little bit further in my speculations than mere electromagnetic energy by proposing the idea that if they were gratings of the actual interference pattern created by those celestial bodies in the fabric of space-time itself, and if we were able to use longitudinal pressure waves of stress in the medium itself, reflected back through gratings of that nature, then you would have an extraordinarily powerful, very sophisticated weapon. And this I think is more or less what the Tablets of Destinies appear to be.
This is absolutely fascinating. Could this be about how should I put it, opening time or space? Could this lead to time travel? Is this about a stargate in some way?
Any time that we're talking about stresses in the fabric of space-time itself, we are doing two things. We're talking about the ability to manipulate gravity, and we're talking about the ability to manipulate time. So as a consequence of this, as an inevitable consequence of this, you would have the ability, at least hypothetically, for some sort of manipulation of time, or if you prefer, time travel. It's this physics that I think that the Nazis were working with their Bell project. It's the same sort of physics that, again and again, you refer to stargates and the ability of the gods apparently to enter or leave these things. So again, it's all part of this same type of physics thinking, and it emerges very clearly from some of the tensor expressions of Einstein's 28 unified field theory, which is kind of kind of another aspect of the story that doesn't get talked about. But I have a new book at the printer right now where I go into that aspect of the physics of things.
Okay. Huh.
You're quite correct in seeing it that way, and again, I want to stress that this is a very flexible physics, because it does permit you, by this manipulation of time, to do two things. It permits you to communicate over extraordinary distances, which you're going to need if you have an interplanetary civilization of this nature. And it also enables you, therefore, not only to manipulate time, but to manipulate space-time in such a way that you can configure a weapon that would make a hydrogen bomb look like a kitchen match.
Exactly. Yeesh, my God. And, you know, I was just handed a question here by Frederick, or a point rather. Basically, that points out that if we even, because what you described here with the interference patterns with the lasers and so forth, them coming together at one point, Frederick just reminded me that, you know, how does it look when the Death Star in Star Wars fires its weapon, you know?
Exactly. And it's interesting that he points this out, because I do the very same thing, as a matter of fact, in the second Giza Death Star book, the Giza Death Star Deployed. I start out with an examination of the Star Wars movie. And it's very interesting that, as he points out, that George Lucas, somebody in his production staff, hit upon the idea of doing that in the film. And that all just kind of indicates to me that there may be more in play in the film than meets the eye. Yeah,
definitely. Again, we know that a lot of the talented film directors out there, they are interested in ancient mythology and study these, and again, who knows what sources they have and what story they might want to retell, you know.
Right, exactly so. And I think in the case of the Star Wars mythology, you know, it's very interesting to look at the parallels, as you say, between the film and these ancient texts, because in the film you have a terribly wicked emperor whose galactic hegemony is based upon this technological wonder weapon that he has.
Yeah.
And that he actually uses to blow up a planet. Well, if we look at the Sumerian text, what do we have? We have gods in possession of a technology that confers, in the texts themselves state this very clearly, that confer upon them, quote, all the power of the universe, unquote.
Jeez.
And, you know, wars are fought, planets are blown up, and it's rather odd when you stop and think about it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, if you would do a kind of a correlation to, let's take Darth Vader. Who would this guy be? Enlil, Enki, or Marduk, or?
That's a really profound question, and you're asking me to speculate off the top of my head, but I think we can do that, because Anakin Skywalker, who becomes Darth Vader, is, to my mind, a very rough assonance on the Anunnaki.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And, you know, the fact that he turns to evil, this is something that I noticed and I talk about in the Cosmic War, because it seems that whoever possesses these tablets of destiny, they become sort of like the character Gollum in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, because these tablets of destiny appear to corrupt whoever has them at the time. Tiamat, you know, turns to this horribly destructive course. Then later on, Anzu turns to it. And then when Ninurta recovers them, he decides he's going to keep them, you know. So, you know, I think that we can probably say that Darth Vader